I've always loved snowstorms. Most people dread the power outages, the icy roads, the way everything comes to a standstill. But I liked the stillness of it, the way the whole world went quiet under that thick, heavy blanket of white. At least that's how I felt, before what happened in February of last year. My uncle had passed away the previous autumn, and my father asked me to help clean out his hunting cabin in the Adirondacks. The place was deep in the woods, nearly a 30-minute drive off the main highway, perched by a half-frozen lake. I'd been there only once as a kid, and I remembered how isolated it felt back then. As an adult, the sense of remoteness was even stronger. The day I drove up, the forecast promised light snow. By the time I reached the narrow road to the cabin, it was already falling in heavy sheets, the kind that make your headlights nearly useless. I barely got the car into the driveway before the storm picked up into a full blizzard. The wind howled so loudly it sounded like a train was rushing past the trees. Inside, the cabin was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood paneling, mounted deer heads, the faint smell of mildew from being shut up all winter. It was stocked with canned food and firewood though, so I wasn't worried about being stranded for the night. I even thought it would be a little cozy, me, a crackling fire, and the storm outside. That first night started normally enough. I set up a lantern on the coffee table, ate a can of soup straight from the pot, and curled up on the couch with my jacket still on. The blizzard raged outside, slamming gusts of snow against the walls so hard the cabin shuddered. Around 10 p.m., as I was poking at the fire, I heard something that didn't fit the rhythm of the storm. 3 soft knocks, not on the door, on the window. I froze. The window was barely 5 feet from where I sat. Slowly I turned my head. Through the frost-blurred glass I saw something. A pale oval shape pressed right up against the window pane. My brain struggled to piece it together. It looked like a face. I shot up, heart pounding, the fireplace poker gripped in my hand. "Who's there?" I shouted. The only answer was the moaning wind. The oval shape stayed for another second, fogging the glass with faint condensation, then slid out of view. My uncle's cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor. Nobody would have been walking around in a storm like this, not without snowshoes and gear, and yet, I'd seen it. Someone had been there, right at the window, looking in at me. I yanked open the front door, bracing myself against the icy blast of wind, and swept the lantern across the porch. Nothing. Snow whipped into my face, stinging like needles. I stepped into the yard, searching for footprints, but the ground was perfectly smooth, the storm covering everything in an unbroken layer of white. I slammed the door shut and pushed the couch against it. The poker stayed in my hand until I finally dozed off around 3 a.m., jerking awake at every groan of the cabin's timbers. The next morning, the storm had calmed. The forest outside was breathtaking in its stillness. Branches weighed down with white, the lake glazed with glassy ice. I forced myself to walk around the cabin, looking for prints. Nothing, not a single indentation around the porch or window. That was when I noticed the glass itself. The frost on the outside pane had thinned in one spot, directly where I'd seen the face. Pressed into the ice was a handprint. Clear as day, 5 fingers splayed wide, long and sharp. Not blurred, not accidental. Whoever had knocked on that window had pressed their hand into the frost hard enough to leave it behind. It wasn't mine. And when I laid my hand against it to compare, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. The print was larger, much larger. This happened when I was 19. I'll never forget it because to this day, it remains the single most unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. At the time, I was still living in a small town in upstate New York. My girlfriend lived about 45 minutes away, and since we were young and reckless, I often stayed at her place late into the night, not caring about how dangerous the drive back could be in bad weather. One night in January, a brutal blizzard hit while I was over there. She begged me to stay, but I had work early the next morning and needed to be home. I figured I could tough it out. It wasn't the first snowstorm I'd driven through. I said goodnight, kissed her, and set off around 11:30 p.m. The roads were terrible. Snow was falling so thick that my headlights illuminated nothing but white haze. My windshield wipers barely kept up. I drove 20, maybe 25 miles per hour the whole way, my hands tight on the steering wheel, every muscle tense. The radio was off. I needed to concentrate. About 15 minutes into the drive, on a rural stretch of 2-lane road, I noticed something ahead, a pair of flashing hazard lights. A car sat on the shoulder, half buried in snow. I slowed, relieved to see another human being out in the storm, thinking maybe they needed help. As my headlights swept over it, I saw it was a dark sedan. The hazard lights blinked in the swirling snow, casting an eerie orange glow against the drifts. I pulled up behind it, keeping my own lights on. Then something strange happened. As soon as I stopped, the hazard lights shut off. I sat there for a moment, squinting through the blur of snowflakes. The car was still there, dark now, sitting perfectly still. I rolled down my window a crack and shouted over the wind, "You okay? Need help?" No response. The snow whipped in, freezing my face. I turned off my radio just to make sure I wasn't missing a reply. Nothing, just the storm. After maybe a minute of waiting, I decided I couldn't just leave someone stranded, so I opened my door and stepped out. The cold punched me like a wall. My boots sank deep into the powder as I trudged toward the car. That's when my stomach dropped. There wasn't a single track in the snow. Not leading up to the car, not behind it. Nothing. The road was coated in fresh powder, but somehow this sedan sat there as if it had been placed down from above. I froze, staring. The storm howled around me. And then, this is the part that still makes my skin crawl, the car was gone. 1 second it was sitting there, dark and still, 10 feet away from me. The next, it wasn't. The headlights of my own car shone across an empty road, illuminating nothing but falling snow. No taillights, no dark shape, just the blank white highway. I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my chest, convinced I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. The road was empty, completely. I scrambled back into my car, slammed the door, and locked it like that would do anything. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield as I sat there, shaking, staring at the empty stretch of road ahead. Finally, I forced myself to drive again. The rest of the way home, I kept expecting to see those hazard lights reappear in the distance. I never did. Even now, years later, whenever I drive that same road during a snowstorm, I catch myself scanning the shoulder, half expecting to see the blink of orange lights in the swirling snow. Sometimes in the corner of my eye, I swear I do. This happened in Minnesota during the record-breaking winter of 2019. If you lived in the Midwest then, you know the storm I'm talking about. The one that shut down highways, stranded hundreds of drivers, and left entire towns buried under several feet of snow. At the time, I lived with my brother in a small house on the outskirts of Duluth. The snow came down so hard that we lost power sometime around midnight. We lit candles, bundled up in blankets, and decided to wait it out until morning. Around 2 a.m., my brother suggested we check the driveway to see if it was still passable. Our house sat on a half-acre lot surrounded by woods, so sometimes the plows didn't reach us until well into the day. We grabbed our flashlights, pulled on boots and coats, and stepped outside into the frozen chaos. The cold was brutal. The snow reached up to our waists in places, and the air was so sharp it felt like breathing glass. The world was unrecognizable, just a wide, white desert stretching in every direction, the trees bent low under their icy burden. As we struggled through the drifts, my brother suddenly stopped, his flashlight fixed on something about 20 feet ahead. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice low. At first, I thought it was just a mound of snow shaped strangely by the wind, but when I squinted, I realized it wasn't. It was a person. Half buried, lying face down in the drift. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Maybe some poor soul had gotten stranded in the storm and collapsed trying to find help. My brother waded forward while I followed, my heart pounding. The closer we got, the more wrong it looked. The body was twisted unnaturally, the arms bent at sharp angles like it had frozen mid-fall. The clothing was strange too, not modern winter gear, but something old-fashioned. A torn wool coat, cracked leather boots, no gloves. "Hey," my brother shouted, kneeling down. "You okay?" The figure didn't move. He reached out a hand, but just before he touched the coat, it collapsed. I don't mean it shifted. I don't mean it crumbled slowly. I mean the entire thing, coat, arms, boots, head, disintegrated into powder, scattering into the snow as if it had never been solid at all. We both stumbled backward, swearing, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The drift was empty now, nothing but white snow. If we hadn't both seen it, I would have sworn I imagined the whole thing. Then my brother gasped. "Look," he whispered. Just beyond where the figure had been, the snow was marked with prints. Clear, unmistakable boot prints. They led straight out of the woods and ended exactly where the body had been lying. But there were no prints leading back. Only a set of tracks that stopped dead in the middle of the yard, as though whoever, or whatever it was, had walked out of the forest, lain down in the snow, and simply ceased to exist. We didn't stay outside after that. We bolted back into the house, barred the door, and sat in silence until dawn. When the storm finally let up, we went back out in daylight, just to prove to ourselves what we'd seen. The yard was smooth and empty, the night's snow having erased everything. But both of us remembered, and to this day, neither of us can explain what we found out there in the snow. A few winters ago, my parents asked me to house sit for them while they were visiting family in Florida. Their house is tucked deep into the woods of northern Vermont, far from the main road. I've always loved the place during summer. It's peaceful, private, and you can see the stars clearer than anywhere else. Winter is a different story. It was late January when I stayed there, and of course that was the weekend a nor'easter hit. By 9 p.m, the power went out. I wasn't too worried. Power outages happen all the time out there. My dad kept a drawer full of candles and an old kerosene lamp. I lit everything I could find, turned on the fireplace, and settled in with a blanket and a book. At first, it was kind of nice. The snow muffled everything outside. The fire crackled warmly, and the flicker of candlelight gave the house a strange but comforting glow. But around midnight, I heard something that made my stomach twist. Voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind whistling around the eaves, but no. These were voices. Faint, distant, carried through the storm. I set my book down and listened. I could just make out what sounded like laughter. A man's voice, then a woman's, talking quickly in low tones. I got up and peered through the nearest window. Nothing but snow whipping across the yard, the woods looming like a dark wall beyond. No flashlights, no movement, just white and black. I told myself it must be neighbors, maybe stuck outside during the storm, but then I remembered. The nearest house was half a mile down the road, and you couldn't hear anyone from that distance. The voices grew clearer. More of them now, not one or two, but several, giggling, whispering, circling the house. My dog, a shepherd mix who usually barked at everything, whimpered and slunk under the bed. That scared me more than anything. I stood frozen in the living room, every candle flame flickering from the draft as the storm rattled the windows. The voices were right outside now, just beyond the glass, laughing softly, murmuring words I couldn't quite catch. I swear I heard my name once, hissed in a breathy tone. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and yanked open the front door. Instant silence. The cold hit me like a sledgehammer as I stepped onto the porch, sweeping the beam across the snow. Nothing. The yard was empty, the drift smooth and untouched. No prints, no people, just the endless storm. I stood out there for maybe 30 seconds before retreating back inside, slamming the door shut. The second I locked it, the voices started again, louder this time. They whispered at the windows, brushed against the walls, circled the house. I sat in the center of the living room with every candle burning, my dog trembling beside me, too afraid to look out. The voices didn't stop until dawn. When the power finally came back, I rushed outside. The yard was untouched, the snow pristine, not a single footprint, not even the tracks from my own dog. It was as if nothing had been there at all. But I know what I heard. And sometimes when I visit my parents now in winter, I turn off the lights late at night just to listen. And every once in a while, faint beneath the wind, I still hear laughter in the snow.